To those of you who are here online, those of you who've come in your cars, thank you so much for being here today. I want to thank Pastor Doggett, Pastor Bushner, wherever they are right now too, because they really had some nice things to say about me, and I really have enjoyed working with them, just getting to know them over the last few months. They are both people who are very serious about being serious at the end of the day. Very different people, right? You know, Pastor Doggett, he can come up here and just preach the Spirit right into somebody. He's so towering, and he just have these really strong artistic sermons. Then you got Pastor Bushner, this guy who is actually a funny pastor. And you know, most pastors make jokes, like I'm going to stay away from that for the most part because I don't think I'm that funny. But he can get people during an appeal to come up, giving their lives to Jesus while they're crying and also be laughing at the same time. It's a true talent. Those guys are both serious about the direction of this church, moving toward being active, being mobilized, working towards social justice. And I'm going to speak and touch on that to some degree today. And how, in order to do something like that, to mobilize, we cannot simply move without tending to our own internal condition, because then we won't get the results we want. So a lot of you here probably don't know who I am. Maybe for some of you, this is your first time seeing me or hearing my name. Maybe some of you were not aware that I'd be coming into this position. So I do want to just briefly, I guess, share a little bit about myself with you. And I could talk to you a lot about how when I was younger, I grew up in Pennsylvania. Wonderful parents, my two sisters, how we grew up together. Seventh-day Adventist Christians from my youth. And simultaneously, though, I played football. I played high school football on Friday nights, even though it was the Sabbath. And I dreamed of making it to the NFL, okay? I was completely convinced, my parents can tell you, that I would play in the NFL. I think I actually told them that when I was like 16 years old. I said, mark my words, I will play in the NFL one day. Well, that prophecy did not come to pass at all. I could also tell you about how when I first went to school, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I dropped out my freshman year because I was depressed. And how later, I ended up going to Andrews University, where I would meet my wife, Megan. While I was also at Andrews, I could tell you I started to study religion and English while I was there. And even though I was studying theology at the time, I never thought I would be a pastor. That was not what I was interested in doing. The traditional route, a lot of the stigma that comes along with it, the politics, I thought, not for me. I don't want to just be planted in some random place without knowing where I'm going. That was just not for me. I could tell you also about a short stint I had when I started teaching court-adjudicated students, young boys, ages 14 to 18, and how when I was there teaching English to them, I remember on one occasion, this big, around 45-year-old white man dragging a 15-year-old black boy to the ground, pressing his entire body onto him, screaming into his ears. That was the first time I saw the system and the brokenness of it up close. I could talk to you about my friends, how a number of them are actually atheists or they're agnostic, and yet a number of them are close to Jesus. And with all of them, though, they are these beautiful, caring, genuine people. They all make me better. So there's a lot, I guess, I could go into and talk about, and in theory, you might know me a little bit better, you might know me more, but I have to say the truth is I don't myself even know who I really am. I'm still learning about my passions, my flaws, my strengths, and yet my blind spots. There are a ton of different things about myself that I don't know. I hurt the people that I love the most. How is that possible? So, I'm learning and still have a lot to learn. I would say that my person is like a cave filled with these rooms of darkness and light. And most of the rooms I haven't even ventured to yet. I'm not even aware that they're there. And I would say that the same thing is probably true for each of you. Your person is also filled with rooms of darkness and light. You're both beautiful and flawed. And I would like for us to get to know each other, if that's okay with you. So like I said, I'm not going to be Pastor Doggett. I'm not going to be Pastor Bushner. I can't be those guys. They are their own works of art. But I can be me. And here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep it real with you. I'll tell you what I believe God is up to. I'll share with you about those rooms of light and darkness that we collectively have, about our human condition. I'll be willing to put myself in uncomfortable places for your sake and for the sake of those who haven't come to know Jesus yet. And I will lead when necessary and follow when not. There's this rapper, Lecrae. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. Anybody? So Lecrae, he's a Christian guy, and I've listened to him for 10 plus years now, and he has this line that I love. He says, "Even crooked sticks draw straight lines." And I think that's what I'm trying to say with all of this. I hope to be a crooked stick that can draw straight lines for you. That is my intention. So now I'm responsible for driving creativity and facilitating our kids and youth programs here at Patmos Chapel. I decided I would share a message then along those lines and talk a little bit about the story of creation and what it ultimately means for the church. So this message is titled Kings, Queens, and the Unrealized Kingdom. So if you flip to your Bibles on your phone or whatever it is, if you have an actual physical Bible in front of you, go to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. You will notice the account of creation of the heavens and the earth there, and all that is in the earth, including us. Specifically, chapter 2, verse 26, there it reads, "And God said, let us make mankind in our image, after our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. And then God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and rule over it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." So essentially in that moment, God sets up his kingdom, and the rulers of said kingdom, the kings and queens of creation, men and women, us. So it's interesting, there's language here that talks about us being created in God's image. The word for image in Hebrew is salem, which can be translated idol or statue. Now, an idol is a visible representation of an invisible thing. And in the ancient world, the idol was put in the temple of every god so that the worshipers could see what that god was like. But our God chose to make living idols, living statues, us. He made us Salem, but not just the Salem Elohim, which means the image of God. Now the thing is, Salem Elohim was a term that was used in the ancient Near East as well. It was used to describe only one type of person, the king. This was the case with the Egyptian pharaoh. It was the case with the Mesopotamian king. The people called the pharaoh, Mesopotamian king, the image of God. And ask a question for you. It's rhetorical. What is it that kings do? They reign. Genesis 2:26 tells us God created man and woman to rule over the fish and the birds and the beast and everything that moves in the earth and the earth itself. The word for rule in Hebrew is rada, which can be translated to reign or have dominion. So kings and queens, they reign. One Hebrew scholar translated this language in the account of Genesis 2 as an invitation to, quote, actively partner with God in taking the world somewhere. It's very beautiful. So God is looking for partners, and he made us to create and to reign this earth. Here's the rub with partners. I don't know about you. Sometimes we get bad partners. Sometimes in a group project, back in school, I remember I was probably one of the worst people to have on your project team when we were trying to get stuff done, because I was very interested in doing it on my own. But if someone else was going to take lead in the group, I would happily let them do that and drive and spearhead that type of work. And what's interesting is my wife is the person who would be driving and spearheading that type of work. She's super organized. Right now she's getting her MBA at Rollins, and she's not a fan of all the partner projects she has to do because she's the one who does the bulk of the work primarily. So maybe some partners aren't so great. And frankly, from the time of creation until now, we haven't exactly held up our end of the partnership with God. One pastor, John Mark Comer, he put it this way in his book, Garden City. Human beings are responsible for art, science, medicine, education, the Sistine Chapel, New York City, space travel, the novel, photography, etc., etc. We could add a bunch of stuff to that list. Every day we're creating new things and adding new things to the world. And you know what? I want to say this. Even those of you who don't think you're creative, you are. You were created to create and reign. It is in you. And you're doing it every day, whether or not you realize it. Now, those were the artistic, beautiful things. The list also has a downside. John Mark Comer goes on to say humans are responsible for 27 million slaves, blatant racism, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, the genocide in Rwanda, ISIS, the financial meltdown of 2008, pornography, global warming, unjust police killings of black men, white men perpetuating a broken system for profit and power. Be honest with yourself. Do you feel like we're kings and queens right now? Do you feel like a king or queen yourself? And maybe you do, and you would be right because you are. But do you live like it? Through your ruthless days of monotony, through the stress and fatigue of this hemorrhaging world in which we find ourselves, I'll tell you that most days I don't really feel like much of a king. The days that I do are few and far in between. And even when I'm living on a day in that king capacity and feeling it, it is very easy for me to forget about in just a day or two. And then suddenly I'm back into my habitual ways of acting, which are lesser than what he's called me to. So let's go back to that early creation account where we decided we could reign without God and ended up giving death reign and evil reign instead over our lives. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, the serpent tells the woman that very familiar phrase, "If you eat this fruit, you won't die. God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." But weren't we already made in the image of God? And yet here's this serpent that's coming along and saying, you will be like God. Ever since that fateful day, we have been striving to be like God, even though we are already like him. Earlier, I said that I don't know who I really am, that you don't know who you really are. And I said that all of us, we have these rooms of light and darkness inside of us, and we do. Genesis tells us it's because we no longer fully know God. We no longer fully know each other, and we no longer fully know ourselves. So I'm just going to fast forward. The crazy thing about this Jesus character and what he did is he took on this human body, this withering, sunken husk of lightness and dark. He walked around in it as a king. He ruled without being the ruler. He was unrecognized, without fame or fortune. He resisted the apple we could not. Jesus' death and resurrection means this: we can again fully know God. We can again fully know each other. We can again fully know ourselves. That's the promise. We were once disconnected, now we can be reconnected. As Paul alludes to, he says, just as one man, Adam, separated us from God, from each other, and from ourselves, so does this one man, Jesus, connect us again to God, to each other, and to ourselves. He restores the original creation, but usually we stop there. He actually does more than that. Once we're connected to God, what is it that we're supposed to do? This is where we have missed it. Church, I want to tell you, all of the last 2,000 years full of failures is due to this one thing. We were supposed to be the kingdom bringers. Paul says in Romans 5:17, "For if by the sin of one man death reigned over all men, how much more will they who receive this overflowing grace and gift of righteousness reign in life by the God-man, Jesus Christ?" The contemporary English version puts the verse this way: death ruled like a king because Adam had sinned. But that cannot compare with what Jesus has done. God has treated us with undeserved grace, and he has accepted us because of Jesus. And so we will live and rule like kings. That's Romans 5:17, according to the contemporary English version. After being saved and restored by Jesus, then what is our call? What's the one thing the church is to do but hasn't done yet effectively? To live and rule like kings and queens. Reigning is what we were made for, but we have forgotten how to do it. Maybe, I don't know if you feel this way. Maybe you feel like we never knew how to do it. Right now, even. How can we mobilize this giant church and make a real, tangible, lasting change in this world? All of us with our rooms of light and darkness. How can we pull something like that off? In the West, we've gotten very used to a comfortable Christianity. We treat church just like anything else we buy. If you don't like the program here, you can go down the street. They've got another one. They probably have more kids' activities right now. Or if you don't like that church, go to this other church. Their preacher is phenomenal. You can also stay at home. You can watch online. You can choose from any plethora of platforms there. And if you want something really inclusive, instead, go check out that church over there. They don't hurt anybody's feelings. They're really nice. But they might not tell you everything you need to know. So looking around for a church, I just want to say it's not a bad thing in itself. It's not a bad thing to tune in online at all. Please don't turn off your computers. That's not what I'm trying to say. The danger is when we trade what matters for what feels good. That's the danger. When we trade what matters for what feels good. Jesus did not command the church to reign in times of comfort, but in times of uncertainty. He actually wants us to move toward the uncertainty. He didn't ask us to sit and wait for a cup of water. I remember that verse differently. He said, go give living water to the eternally perishing. We spend so much time searching for a perfect thing or the right moment to act when God has given us the authority to create it. We are not simply people who are guests upon this earth. We are the created kings and queens and rulers, the masters of creativity. That is our origination and our destiny. He did not put his spirit into us. Once we're saved, it's not over. He did not put his spirit into us so we could store it up for future days in heaven, future days of bliss, but to bring the kingdom into this world now, to breathe it out in our every action, in our thinking, in our talking. That is our call. Jesus said the kingdom of God is at hand. It has been since he came. Go, he told the early church, teach all nations, every person. Baptize whoever would believe in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. In the original creation, he said, be fruitful and multiply. And now here he says, go and teach and make disciples. Do you see the similarity in those two phrases? Both times it's procreative instruction and an invitation to reign. In the beginning, we were created out of dust and breath. Now we are created from above, whatever that means. Definitely a very different phrase than the original creation. And in other places in the scriptures, we're told that we are made a little bit lower than the angels, but upon receiving Jesus, we are made higher than the angels. Ellen White talks about this too. It's quite a mystery that we go from being a created being to being a begotten being because Jesus was begotten, the only Son of God, and we receive his inheritance. So it actually takes us to spiritually quite a different place than what we originally were, and all of that, of course, unmerited, undeserved, to say the least. So there was this original creation, and then there's this new creation. Both times we're set up as kings and queens upon the earth to reign and to create. I want to say something that might be controversial. The atrocities of this world are not first attributed to evildoers. God does hold them accountable, yes. Derek Chauvin, Richard Spencer, who, if you don't know that person, he's the guy who coined the term alt-right, which now is fueling a white supremacy-backed White House. People who work evil, God will judge them. He will. But here's the thing. We're not supposed to be so concerned with their judgment. Part of the responsibility of reigning as a king or queen is to judge. But the condition God laid out for us is to leave the judging to him. Interestingly, his judgment in the scriptures is particularly concerned with us, the church, not others. Those others have hurt us, all right? We do have good reason to blame them. We have reason to hurl accusations in our pain and hurt, given what they did, given what they continue to do. And frankly, I don't even know what I'm talking about. To be black in America, to be a black man in America, is to face a especially cruel type of injustice. To see people who are brown, who look like yourself being killed for no reason. And usually no justice follows. The media hypes it up for a day or two, and then the world just shrugs its shoulders and walks away. And then it happens all over again. So I don't know what that's like. I never will know. We want justice, right? And applying judgment seems like the way to get there. It is reasonable. But God is calling us to do something more than what is reasonable. He is calling us to do more than what is right. That's why God's words can be hard sometimes. In order to make the change our world so desperately needs, we cannot look and be focused outward on the failures of others. We have to do the thing that seems unfair to us. We instead have to look inward to our rooms of darkness, our rooms that we think are light and may actually hold some darkness within and be concealing darkness. And as a church, we have to look at our collective rooms of light and darkness. Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17, that's 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17, judgment must begin at the house of God. And if God first judges us here, what chance do the others have who have not heard the gospel? If God judges us, let me talk a little bit about that and what he's saying there. If God judges us and we, the church, are not who we need to be, and we ourselves were barely even saved, how much less of a chance do those who witness our continual failures as a church and as people have it being saved? If we do not reign as the kings and queens we were called to be, more than being right, and are not instead infused with love, a love that others don't even deserve, they will not see him. They will instead see us. And that is not enough. They will turn the other direction and walk away. Insanity will ensue. The cycle of death and injustice will continually repeat, even though the very thing we are trying to do was get justice. The path to justice is not simply judgment. Judgment instead begins with us. Everything is at stake here at the church, and we squabble over silly things, like the church shouldn't buy this or that, or this person shouldn't be leading out. Well, communion has to be done this way. Really? Is that really what we're going to do? There's no longer any time for that, actually. We have entered the final hour. Are we really paying attention to what the scriptures are asking us to do? I think a lot of people here want what is good, and there are probably a lot of people who are not interested in squabbling over silly things and wasting our time. We're trying to understand one another, and sometimes it's just as simple as miscommunication, and we need to communicate better. A lot of us do want to rule like kings and queens. This kingdom he's promised, we want to partake in it. We just may not know how to reign in a world that's very disinterested in Jesus' teachings, who is quite bent against him or the idea of God in general. They consider God, this Jesus God, the stuff he talks about, idealistic, and I think maybe we do as a church as well. Can we really take his teachings to the extreme, or are we just going to take the stuff that's like low-hanging fruit, and the things that are harder we're going to leave for somebody else, or for a future day when it really is the final hour and the church will then become what they're supposed to be, but not yet? I think that the rulers of this world continue to create results no one wants. Someone or something must emerge. If there is a simple formula to reigning as kings and queens, and we in the Western world, we love formulas, we love answers, I would say if there's a simple formula, it's this. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 20 to 22. But be warned, it is difficult. Paul says, to the Jew, I became like a Jew, that I might win the Jews. To the Greek, I became like a Greek, that I might win the Greeks. And to those who were weak, I myself became weak, that I might win the weak. The word weak here in the original Greek means to be physically or morally bankrupt. Paul was willing to consider the morally weakest among him. Translated, he was willing to go toward the people who hated him, who argued against him, the ones who furthered injustices in the world. That's what he was willing to do. I wonder, am I, I'm asking myself, are we up to the formula for living a king-queen life? Test yourself in this. To the atheist, I became like the atheist in order to win the atheist. To the agnostic, I became like the agnostic in order to win the agnostics. To the Muslim, I became like the Muslim in order to win the Muslims. Maybe I'll say it this way. To the other, I became like the other in order to win the other. I got to know them. I took my time with them. I suspended my negative judgments, as difficult as it was. I walked around in their shoes for a while. I saw the world as they saw it, or at least I tried. And then I held them in my arms. I realized they're not so other. That I might win them to Christ, I did this. Are you willing to live toward what you don't know? This is the invitation Jesus has offered us as kings and queens from the beginning. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. And it's also the formula for relational harmony and sustainability. Paul just goes deeper and tells us about how to love your neighbor by yourself by saying, become like the other, move toward them, do what's hard. The church is called to embody this formula on earth, but we haven't. So I want to say to those of you who fear and hate Trump and Trump supporters, to those of you on the other side who fear and hate Democrats, the time has come for you to give that fear and hate to God. To those of you who fear or discuss the mention or sight of a person in a hijab, or a person who identifies as LGBTQ, or talks differently or looks differently, the time has come for you to give that disgust, that hate to God. To those of you who are in a strange rivalry with another person in this church, the time has come for you to give that to God. There is no longer time for things like that. We are so quick to judge others as other. And often these people are guilty of nothing than being other. They're just different than we are, and we don't understand them, and so we jump to conclusions, we judge. So, we are now in a time when we must love a person. Even if a person is right in their sin, let's say a person is in their sin, the worst thing that we can conjure up, that is when we're supposed to love them, not afterward. However, that requires a lot of hard work on our end, and it requires us to love while expecting nothing in return. And at large, the church is probably not willing to do this. I think we're too selfish, and honestly, we've become content with mediocre results. We don't think a greater possibility really is out there. So we've settled, and judgment is a whole lot easier, according to our own conscience, than giving it up to God. Then we're forfeiting control, and we don't want to do that. And honestly, that is why the church is dead. It's why we are where we are. It's why the version of Christianity we hear about in the news is one of self-righteous evangelicals wandering after this charismatic leader in the White House, a person who calls sin black and white, literally. It's easy to point at people and put them into a box. You don't have to get close in order to do that. You don't have to love in order to do that. But let me be clear, in order to love, you have to get close. You have to get intimate with what you fear. You have to allow God to destroy every ounce of self-righteousness in you, aka your right to judge others. So I want to ask, are you willing to live toward what you don't know? Are you willing to love what you fear? It is the way of a king and a queen. You remember that? So that serpent we talked about back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Not only did it offer men and women the opportunity to become like God, which we already were, but it further offered us the ability to judge like God. The serpent said, "You will know good and evil," like that was somehow to our advantage. Jesus tells us, "Judge not, that you be not judged. Condemn not, that you be not condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." Luke 6, verse 37. Those rooms of light and darkness in each one of us, we can see them in others too. That's what's hard. Sometimes we see rooms of darkness in other people that they can't see in themselves. That's probably the most frustrating thing of all. We're so ready to tell them about those rooms of darkness we can see, but they can't. We're too ready to tell them. Are we willing to look at those people in the midst of their darkness and accept them? Do we ache for them? Do you long for them and plead for them to experience a life with Jesus? Okay, this is a common question. Would you be willing to die for that person, right? That's like the craziest question to ask, because that's exactly what Jesus did. When we were still yet sinners, he died for us. In the midst of the darkest thing you've seen on TV this week, the person who seems to be ruled by evil the most right now, Jesus died for that person alone. God is not an impersonal God. He didn't die for everyone. He died for you. That's how he operates. One to one. He died for every single person. So, are you willing to live for the person who you deem as other? The atheist, the agnostic, the Muslim, the LGBTQ person, the Republican, the Democrat, even the officers who unjustly kill. Are you willing to go to any length for the sake of the gospel? Are you willing to let love destroy every ounce of hate in your life? I will tell you, I'm not there yet, to be honest. I'm a work in progress, but I want to be there. Jesus will not return until we become the church that is willing to go to any length for the ones who least deserve it. Then and only then will the world be without excuse that they have lived and seen the face of Jesus. But God waits. He doesn't wait for some arbitrary time in the future. He waits for the church to show the world who he really is. The time is upon us. Today is the day, not tomorrow. There is urgency. God has placed the final work on the shoulders of this generation. Right now, I want you to try something. This may feel a little bit weird, but I'd like you to take a moment and pause wherever you are in your car. And on the count of 3, I want you to inhale a deep breath. Those of you online, do it too, please. So on the count of 3, I'm going to count. Hold your breath as long as you can. 1, 2, 3. Wherever you are, I want you to hold it. Keep holding it. And please participate if you can. My intention is not to take out anybody, so if your lungs aren't that great, please do not go until you pass out. But keep holding it. Go until you're pushed. I probably should have looked up like the average person or the average time a person can hold their breath before doing this, so I don't really know where you're at right now. But I'm going to say, okay, let's stop. How did it feel after you breathed in when you weren't able to have air for such a decently long period of time? I imagine it was pretty visceral. I was recently out swimming in a pool. I don't really know how to swim. Like, I can paddle or whatever, but I mean the arm over arm, that sort of thing, and you're swinging your head out of the water to breathe. I don't know how to do that, and I was trying to do it, And at the end of one lap, I was coming up like, I could barely breathe at all. So the longer we're without air, the point I'm trying to make is this. The longer we are without air, the more intensely we suck it in the first chance we get. The church is declining. If we look at the numbers around the world, we don't even have to look at the numbers. It's in the way people talk. It's in the way people act. The world religions are also stagnating. Generation Z is the first, and those are people who are born in like 2003 or after, or 1997 or after, something like that. Generation Z is the first post-Christian group of people, generation in America, according to Barna Research. 2 out of 3 boys view pornography regularly by the age of 14. The porn industry is worth nearly $100 billion. It's also that same industry that's the single biggest contributor to the human sex trafficking trade, which currently, as I mentioned earlier, enslaves over 20 million people. You can read about it at fightthenewdrug.org if you want to learn more. Now we have this new disease called COVID that has emerged in just a few months and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives already. And a bunch of people don't even believe it's real. China threatens the U.S., saying we have pushed China to the brink of Cold War. Our reality TV star turned president just announced an executive order against social media companies, saying they unlawfully censor conservative content. I wonder what's next. Where are we going? Tomorrow we'll be talking about the newest scandal, I'm sure. And he will probably win the presidency again. Another black man will die at the hands of another white officer. It'll happen soon. This world has not been able to inhale for a while now. When the inhale comes, it will be piercing and swift. It will be like a torrential rain after an insufferable drought. Already now, droplets of rain are on the horizon. There is a woman. She's out there. A marriage procession awaits her. When she begins to move, she will give every soul the opportunity to breathe, to inhale, finally. She will offer them that living water, not when she becomes perfect, but when she realizes she isn't perfect. The inhale for the rest of the world will only come when she comes to the end of what she can do herself and relies on the King for the strength to do only what he can do. It appears impossible to us, but to him it is possible. John says in Revelation 19, verses 6 and 7, "And I heard what seemed like the voice of a great multitude, the voice of many waters and the voice of a lot of thunder. The Lord God Almighty reigns," the voice said. "Let us be glad and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come. His wife, the church, has made herself ready." Has made herself ready. The ball is in our court to make ourselves ready. Maybe you're now asking, now what? What am I supposed to take away? How can little old me make the difference in such an overwhelming world at the midnight hour of evil? And that's okay. Ask that question. Don't rush to an answer. Don't rush out of what you feel in the midst of that question. Sometimes questions are more valuable than answers. But remember this, Salem Elohim, you are the image of God. You are the kings and queens upon this earth. Reigning is meant for you, not for evil. And it is time for your reign. So as you drive away today, for those of you online, before you fold your laptop and slip your phone into your pocket, I'd like to invite all of you to ask yourself 3 questions. Write this down and take it with you. Who am I afraid to get close to? That's question number 1. Who am I afraid to get close to? Question number 2. What am I afraid will happen if I do? And question 3, how might I do it anyway? Take 15 minutes today to reflect on this, just 15. Do it with family, friends, or do it alone, but take the time. And anybody, I don't know, maybe there's someone today who feels like this king-queen life is for them. And maybe they haven't seen God, really experienced him before. Maybe this Jesus character is a little bit more tangible than they initially imagined. If that's you today and you want to find out what the king-queen life is all about, you want to know Jesus, if you're interested in living toward what you don't know, I dare you to text surrender to 62488. Text surrender to 62488. Someone in our church will reach out to you, guide you in the next steps in following Jesus. You can do that now. Or if you would like to go deeper in your relationship with God and learn more about him, you can text the same thing, surrender to 62488. Let's pray. Lord, you are the God who challenges us to do more than we can do ourselves. You take us to the brink of what we can do and then ask us to go further by surrendering to you. It is hard work. You did not call us to an easy work, God, but that is okay. You want to do something above what we can ask or think, something impossible. You want justice in this world for us. You want us to mobilize and to go out and move and do things that will shock the world. But the only way we can do it is if we look inward first. If we allow you to change our internal condition so that what the world sees when we do mobilize and we do reach out to others is so different than what the world has to offer. It is from another stratosphere. It is from the kingdom of God, and it is embodied in your image of God, your Salem Elohim, the kings and queens, your church. Lord, do whatever you have to get us to that point. Take us to our brink. Might we be willing, Lord. Might you knock on the doors of every heart here. The one thing that a person is thinking about right now where they don't want to give it up. God, get at them on that one thing. Don't leave them alone. You are faithful. You will do what you are going to do. Lead us now, Lord, leaving this place, asking those questions, and dwelling on your person. In Jesus' name we do worship and pray. Amen.